In this episode, we discuss the relationship between love, worship, and gods in the Season 2 finale of the Bottom Turtle Podcast. Hello everybody, and welcome back to the Bottom Turtle Podcast. I'm Dr. Shannon Ray, and we're joined by our co-host Oyani and How you doing, Oyani?
I'm doing okay, Shannon. What's up, man? How's the week been? Or when was the last time we recorded? It's been like what?
A month, I think.
Yeah, about a month or so.
Yeah, that seems to be our schedule. I think I think we're getting like every month or so, but this week has been super stressful. Mainly because I was trying to prepare the outline for the podcast. So okay. I think the thing that really was exhausting was coming home and then like being exhausted coming home from work and then telling myself I have to sit down and write.
Yeah. I agree. Yeah, I mean, and I think another thing was, the topics I should say that we will be talking about today are, some of one of those type of topics that we want to make sure we're, articulating correctly.
We're minding our P's and Q's on. We gotta be clear with this one.
But anyway, I don't know. And I was thinking earlier today, I was like, man, it's great we're recording this on a Sunday because in Nigeria on a Sunday at about this time, I would just be getting out of church.
Oh, okay.
I'll just be out of church now and heading home. And I was thinking about it earlier today, and I was thinking like the difference between my life then, and how much like going to church and all of that was such a huge part of my life. And now it's almost like night and day, but I can't help but still hold on to a lot of those things that I picked up, when that was a huge part of my reality, essentially.
Yeah. I mean, it's the same for me. I haven't been to church. Actually, I don't go to church, but when I was a kid, I used to, we used to go it was actually weird because we would go every fourth Sunday, like the fourth Sunday of every month. We would go because our church was in Oklahoma, but we lived in Kansas. Okay. And so it was like a 2 or 3 hour drive to church.
Okay. And so you can go like every Sunday.
Yeah, but I don't even think the church had service every Sunday. I think that was just their normal schedule. But we had prayer meeting every Thursday. So prayer meeting is just like a mini church. And we would do that at our house where family members and people from the church who lived in our area would come, and then we would sit down and we would we'd start off with some songs. Like we had this little book with hymns in it. So we'd start off reading singing some songs. Then my parents would read from the Bible, or someone would read from the Bible. And then the adults would sit down, they would pray, and then they would stand up and explain some of their faults that they had that they were working on. So they would stand up and kind of admit things that they could improve on, and then say that they were going to try to improve on them, and then we would sing some songs and it would be over. So that was like every Thursday we would do that.
How long did this last for? Like an hour?
Probably about an hour. Yeah, about an hour. Yeah.
That's interesting. I kind of like that, though. The idea that, you get together with people and you discuss, hey, these are the things I'm struggling with. These are the things I'm trying to improve. I don't know. And it has to be some benefit to being able to admit that, though.
Yeah, I can't. Yeah. Honestly, it's one of those things that I don't even know how much of an impact that has on my thinking. Like, just the idea that, because, growing up, my parents were like gods in the sense that they completely created my reality. I remember growing up, they were like, for one, my parents were very stable. They emphasized having a schedule. Okay. So their kids were on pretty strict schedules. We went to bed at the same time. We took our bath at the same time. We had list of chores that we had to get done every day. It was a very structured household. And so because of that, everything felt so stable that they felt like the things that created your reality, and they were more important than anybody else outside the home. Like they were more important than like the law. They were, my parents, the rules that my parents created in that house were so important. So I can't imagine how something like those people standing up and saying like, these are my faults and these are the things I need to work on. Like you're like looking at this humility of how can I improve myself. And I'm looking at this from the creator of my reality saying, like, I need to improve myself. I need to always work on myself.
That is interesting, though.
Yeah.
I can't imagine if I had that, because I don't know how often, if I'm being honest, I heard too many adults admit fault when I was growing up.
Oh, really? Huh.
I'm trying to think now, like, has this even ever happened? I don't know.
Yeah.
But to see that in a place like a church where you go weekly and you see these adults, being able to do this, that has to have some serious impact, man. It really does. Yeah.
Well,
Go ahead.
Overall, my household, I would say that my household was one that emphasized truth. Whether or not my parents were explicitly aware that that's what they were doing, it was a household that didn't reward you for doing nothing special.
Yeah.
Like you don't get patted on your back for like just being goofy or saying something or wanting to be cute, or basically you weren't awarded for wanting attention for attention's sake in our house. And on top of that, my parents, they punished you. Like, it was pretty easy to understand the rules of that world, because you do your homework, you don't get in trouble at school, your parents are cool. You know what I mean? They don't punish you for no reason. But if you're doing something bad, you might get a punishment where it's like, all right, you have to go to bed early, or all right, you might have to not get cake or something like that. Like, that's for like a minor punishment. Or if you did something really bad, like you stole, or you went and you slapped somebody, or you did something really bad, you might have got a spanking, And so that was a punishment that was held for doing more severe things. And so in that world, the rules they established were easy to identify, easy to follow. If you do the right thing, then you don't get punished. And if you do the wrong thing, you get punished. You're explained why you're punished. And it's fair. And so you're kind of growing up in this fair reality that really prepared me for just going out into the real world, I think.
Yeah. And it's just so interesting. And this was kind of what I started out with, saying that, when you were writing up the outline for this, we understand how serious the topic is, talking about the idea of gods, or what is a god. And you said something a few seconds ago when you were talking about your family. You said your parents were the creators of your reality.
Yeah.
And the two most interesting words in there is creators and reality.
Yep.
And a lot of times when you talk about God, it's difficult to separate creation from the idea. Mm-hmm. Because to be a God, there's a certain element of creation, of creating something that comes with it. You're trying to bring something into reality, or you have the power to bring something into reality. Yeah. Yeah. Like a good example would be like when you talked about the MMA judges, for example. Yeah. Yeah. Being able to create the MMA reality that we all have to live in.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and that's the thing. It's like and if you think about the idea of the God, like in the Bible, it's a lot of times people think of it as like an all-powerful, all-knowing creator. And if you're thinking about it, it's like, why is it that we choose an all-powerful, all-knowing creator as like an ideal? Because even take something like the idea of the Sabbath, of God made reality in 6 days, and then on the seventh day he rested. And so this is supposed to be the creator of the universe, the thing that we are trying to mimic and follow. And on the seventh day, it rested. And so because of that, we have this ritual where we have this Sabbath or the Sunday where we're not supposed to work, because we're trying to follow the ideal creator. Yeah. And so I always think about it in the fact that if you're trying to mimic an idea of God, like you're trying to mimic the God, then what does that say about what you are? It's like you are a creator that is trying to mimic the conceptualization of an ideal creator.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is something that, it's relevant in different, no matter how you look at it or what you decide to, elevate as your God. This idea is pretty consistent. And when we're using the word God here, the easiest way I visualize this is, what is the thing that you worship?
Yeah.
So growing up, I was very, very immersed in Christianity and the Bible in itself. And even today, I still surprise a lot of my friends with how much of the Bible I actually know.
Yeah.
Because
we talk about that sometimes.
It's way more than even people who actually actively go to church now. And I haven't been to church in a while. And the reason was my family took this seriously. Like, you have to read the whole thing, memorize the verses, all that stuff.
Yeah.
And over time, as I've grown up, every once in a while, a verse will just sneak into my brain and I will just chuckle to myself, like, this makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Every time. And it's so funny because I'm thinking about that now, and one of the very common things in the Bible was this idea that God is a jealous God. And basically, the whole thing is he wants you to worship him and only him.
Yeah.
So, and I'm wondering to myself, it's like this idea of worship is tied so significantly to your God, which is in turn
and what you hold sacred.
What you hold sacred, which in turn informs what is or becomes your reality.
Yes. And, if you're a listener of this podcast and you've listened to all the episodes leading up to this, you know that we have this framework where we break things into hard reality and soft reality, where hard reality it goes back to the degree of freedom soup that we introduced in the first episode of the very first season. And so when you're trying to conceptualize hard reality, you're trying to conceptualize the state of the universe. But the problem is that when you're trying to conceptualize the state of the universe, we're so used to doing it through the filter of a mind. We're so used to a mind imposing what it thinks reality is, like its model of reality. And so the mind's simulation or imagination or interpretation of the objective state of the universe, the mind's interpretation is soft reality, and the actual thing that it's modeling is hard reality, the actual state of the universe. And so to conceptualize the state of the universe without using a mind, we introduce the degree of freedom soup, where the only thing we're assuming is that the universe has some properties, which we call the degrees of freedom. And then those degrees of freedoms can have some settings. So, for example, in physics, momentum and position are degrees of freedom of like a rock that a rock can have, And then depending on what its momentum is and its position, that changes the configuration of the rock. And so when we're talking about this creating your reality, we're talking about the creating of your soft reality, how you simulate, how you conceptualize, how you imagine hard reality, the actual state of the universe. Yeah. So that was just something that wanted to clarify when we're talking about what you worship and what you hold sacred and what you identify as a self as being related to how your reality is created. Like how is your model of reality created? Because that affects how you think. It affects how you experience things. It affects how you feel during an interaction. It affects like how you interact with something. If you see a cup and
your interpretations of things.
Yeah, your interpretations of things.
Yep.
So in that sense, it creates your reality for you.
And I think it's brilliant when you start to look around you and separate yourself from the idea of God being this all-knowing supernatural being, and understanding that even some of the more popular, some of the more important, I should say, parts of the Bible seem to always harp on this idea that you could essentially pick something else as your God and start to worship it.
Oh, yeah. The whole idea of false prophets.
It always tries to tell you that.
Yeah.
It always tries to tell you that all the time. Yeah. Like, hey, you got to worship this guy. And,
hey, you got to worship this guy.
Yeah, because, your life's going to fall apart if you worship anything else. And it's that plain and simple. Now, this is not to say that,
it's just funny because, anyway, I'm sorry.
This is not to say that the Bible in itself has figured it all out or whatever. Mm-hmm. For me personally, I approach that book as just a strategy guide.
Yeah.
That you can use to go through the world. You can decide, hey, this is the strategy guide I want to go through. And essentially, this God, the Christian God, as in its purest form, I should say, when you read through the Bible with the mindset of this is a strategy guide, you start to see that one of the most popular things they're trying to say is that this God, this guide, if you give yourself to it, if you worship it, this is how you're supposed to live. You do this, you do that. If you do this, this happens. it's literally just telling you, when you choose that, okay, so when you decide that that's the way you want to go, or this is the God you want to worship, you're essentially saying that you are dedicating your life to preserving this thing, this idea, this belief system for you to, and then you're going to use that as you go through life. I don't know if I'm making sense.
Yeah. Well, what it does is like, so you say it's your strategy guide. And what that means is like, when I'm in situation X, I do Y because of Z, right? So it's like, you can imagine, like, what if you had a list of all of the possible scenarios you could find yourself in, and then given those scenarios, you had something that told you to do this thing. Because if you do this, then you'll get a prize. If you do this, you'll win the game. If you do this, you'll avoid catastrophe. If you do this, and so imagine that for every scenario you could find yourself, you had something that tells you what to do. Yeah. That's your strategy guide. And in doing so, those things that's telling you to do are a set of rules. You are following a set of rules. Win this, you should do this. And what that does is that given that situation, you're going, how you behave, what happens during that situation determines how you program the universe and how you're programmed by the universe. And so your spirit and how you program your surroundings depends on your strategy guide. It depends on how you interpret situations. It depends on when you get an input, what outputs it maps to. Yep. It's like an algorithm. Win this, then this. Win that, then this. It's an algorithm. It is your worldview. And this thing that is your worldview, if you have a worldview that's always telling you to do things to put yourself in a worse position, then that thing is not taking care of you. That thing does not love you. But if you have a worldview that always gives you an answer that either prevents you from entering into a calamity,
protects you, or moves you into a better position.
Moves you into a better position. Yeah. Then you can start saying, oh, does the spirit that whose rules I'm following, does it love me? Does it take care of me? Yeah.
And I imagine it as the difference between using having all the list of all the words. Imagine if it's like using a physics textbook or a dictionary to play Scrabble. Okay. I know we're back to the word games again, but it's the difference between using a dictionary to figure out what words can I play or can I not play, or a physics textbook.
Yeah.
Because okay, imagine if you were going to play Scrabble professionally and you needed a guide of some sort. Mm-hmm. Basically, or imagine if we were trying to create a god of Scrabble, for example. Based off of what we've created so far. If you listen to all the episodes, we're saying, look at it as almost like God mode. What is the God mode of a Scrabble going to be like? The God mode of Scrabble is the person, the algorithm, whatever it is, that knows every position of all the tiles on the board at any single time, and everything they can possibly play to put them in the best position to get the highest score every time. Yeah. So imagine if you created that. And then, of course, someone else who has another strategy guide that they use, another god of something else, god of physics or something. Yeah. You can't worship this god here and hope to get to the top of the Scrabble world.
Or just imagine that there are two people who are playing Scrabble and they both have their own Scrabble god. One thinks that this is the Scrabble god and the other one thinks this is the Scrabble god. Mm-hmm. Given that what they think the ideal strategies to Scrabble are, they're going to follow that god, and that's going to determine like whether or not they're going to win the game. Because, one god might have better strategies than the other one.
Yes, than the other one.
And I think that one of the things that we can put more into focus is this idea of worship. Like, what does it mean to worship? And I remember, so the development of this podcast originally started off with having all these ideas and then trying to write them all down. Like I was almost thinking I was going to try to make a book out of all of it.
Oh yeah. I remember now. I remember that now.
And one thing that I found when trying to do that is, it takes a lot of energy to, after you get off work, to say, I'm going to spend another 4 or 5 hours trying to write a book. Like that, you know how exhausting that is. But one thing that I did is I tried to explain some of these ideas. And so one of the ideas I was trying to explain was the concept of love. And I was trying to explain it to my friend Howard, who you met recently, which was pretty cool.
Oh, yes. Man, I was going to talk about that when the podcast started, man. That was such a fun time we had.
Yeah.
With him.
Shout
out to Howard, by the way.
Yeah, shout out to Howard. And I wanted to mention too that the whole no mentation without representation phrase, that was Howard's idea, the phrase. So I just wanted to give him credit for that. But I remember I would get off work and I was trying to explain to Howard my interpretation of the concept of love, given this kind of information theoretic point of view. And the first way that I was thinking about it, I thought that love was what you feel responsible for. So I was thinking like, oh, the things you feel responsible for, the things you sacrifice for, the things that you're trying to take care of. And so I thought that love was the concept of responsibility. But then I started realizing that you can be responsible for stuff that you don't love. Like, for instance, if you were captured by someone, they're like, I want you to take care of this bathroom. You have to always clean it, and it's your job to take care of it. You may be...
love the bathroom.
Yeah, you may be responsible for that bathroom, but you don't love it. So it couldn't have been just the concept of responsibility. So and then I started thinking that it was the concept of what you identify as the self. So your identification of self was love. But then I realized that you can hate yourself. Just because you identify something as the self doesn't mean that you love it. So both of these things wouldn't work for these reasons. And so the conclusion that I ended up coming to after spending like weeks of trying to explain this this concept by writing it down was that love is worship. And the way that I want to argue that is using the configuration stability principle. Because as we said back then, we used this example of an oval, which is like a membrane. Like imagine like a celled creature, and like so you have this oval which represents like the membrane, and then we have these little circles inside the membrane that represent the constituent parts that make up the whole. So the oval itself with all of its constituent parts is the whole, but it's made up of a bunch of individual circles inside the membrane. And so in the configuration stability principle, we're talking about the fact that these biochemical configurations are only pseudo-stable. So unless they are competing for resources and winning resources to remain stable, they're going to decay and they'll stop existing. And so they have to constantly strive for resources to remain stable.
Compete for resources.
Yeah, to remain stable. And so in this idea that love is worship, you can think about this system trying to find a particular configuration or state of being and then make that thing stable. So as you're moving through the world, you interacting with other people, you're interacting with your environment, it affects how you feel. Who you hang out with can change how you behave. It can change your spirit. And so if you want to have a particular state of being become stable, you have to follow a certain set of rules and do a consistent set of interactions to make that state of being stable. Like, for example, going to church every week. You go to church every week. You're reminded about, what the rules are. So and then you go there, you refresh those rules in your head. Then you go out in the world and you act in accordance with those rules so that you take the spirit associated with those rules and you make it stable within yourself. So that you preserve it. Yeah. And so the act of preserving is the act of making loving decisions to make a configuration that you worship stable. So that when you take in data, you process it to ask yourself, what decisions do I need to make so that I can bring a future state of the universe into existence in which the configuration that I love is stable and continues to exist. And this process of taking in data is the process of using your memory to construct a simulation of the set of possible future states of the universe. And then when you make a decision to make a certain configuration stable, then that is the process of using memory to give that configuration an advantage in information processing games.
Yeah, because I think the concept of worship, love, and God are just so intricately tied together that it's one of those things where once you start to pay more attention to the things that you worship. And I guess that probably you have to start from figuring out what yourself is exactly. And I think that is the first place a lot of people probably struggle with, is figuring out what is the self that I'm trying to preserve.
What is the self that I'm trying to preserve? And I think that in the end, like, because you have to think about it. What is the self that I'm trying to preserve? Okay, well, if I'm trying to preserve the self that is a physicist or a mathematician or whatever it is, if I'm trying to preserve that self within my own system, then so to preserve the self, I know which actions can keep me consistent with that spirit and which ones don't. So for example, you can take the idea of, like we were using in configuration stability principle, the idea of the God of kindness. So I want to embody and worship the spirit of kindness. But then you go through the world and you're constantly making acts that are selfish, that are taking advantage of others, that are, just exactly not kind. Then as you make those decisions that aren't consistent with the will of kindness, you are not preserving that. You're not preserving that spirit in your system, because the God of kindness comes with a set of rules on how to behave through the world such that you are actually embodying that spirit. And so when you try to make something stable, you start to live a life in accordance with how that spirit programs reality. And so this act of preserving a spirit through worship is the act of determining which spirits you embody, which determines how you interpret reality. And then how you interpret reality affects how you make decisions, which affects which experiences you have, which affects how you create. And also these different spirits, because they affect how you interpret, they affect your language. So like how you map inputs to outputs depends on which spirits you are embodying through the actions you take. Yeah.
And a lot of times, all things being equal, because of course, there's some varying factors that might affect whether this spirit comes through existence or is preserved or not. But think about the idea of someone who wants to preserve the spirit of the scientist that's in them. Like you, for example, you figured out you wanted to be a physicist from
15,
from a scientist from 15. I can't imagine if you spent all your spare time playing soccer, playing video games, you didn't go to classes, there's so much that you need to do. There's so much you need to worship. There's so much you need to
rules
practice.
I need to follow. Time, I sacrifices I need to make.
Rules you need to follow. Rules you need to if you translate all of those things to every single religion that exists out there, you will start to see that there's so many similarities in what like a Muslim sees as their God and a Christian sees as their God, and someone like you who's a scientist, someone like me who's an artist. We start to see that there's so many similar traits. For example, you could say that going to church every Sunday is me saying, hey, you know what? I want to be an artist. I have to just draw a lot.
Yeah.
I'm going to make the time to draw every Sunday morning. That's your church.
Yes. And one way that I think that this can be illuminating is imagine, so speaking to all the scientists out there who are listening to this, imagine if in a month from now or in a year from now or just sometime in the future that all of the information that has been accumulated on science, all of the sciences, chemistry, physics, biology, psychology, like all of them. Imagine if all that stopped existing. It was all destroyed at some point in the future. And then imagine that you are responsible for it. And not only are you responsible for it, but you made an active decision to betray all the other scientists around you.
To destroy
and you deceived them so that you could destroy that information, destroy that structure. It's like that in Star Wars where all the Jedi are killed. You also have a plan to kill all the scientists. You destroy all the information, and so that spirit essentially no longer exists. Now, that act is a complete opposite of putting the system in an advantageous position, the spirit of scientist. It is the antithesis.
The complete opposite of worship.
It's the opposite of worship. And so when you imagine that, just imagine how you would feel if you knew someone was doing that. and what you would do to stop it. And I think that as a scientist, given how much I have sacrificed to that spirit, that idea is it's unfathomable.
It's terrifying.
I would do everything I could to stop that from happening.
Yeah.
I can't allow that to happen because I worship that data.
And then the things that you do to stop that from happening are the things that we're talking about. Is how you, these are the things I do to preserve this spirit. These are the things that I do to worship this God. Is, if you found out that someone had this nefarious plot, they're trying to kill all the scientists, you're probably going to be going out there spreading more science.
Oh, yeah.
You're going out there trying to make sure I got to keep this knowledge. I got to preserve this.
Yep.
That act in itself is from a place of love.
Yes, exactly.
And that's exactly what it is. That's how it all ties in together. The idea of, what is your God? What do you worship? How much do you love it?
Because the thing is people have to understand that when I think about the amount of time I've dedicated to physics and mathematics, and the way I program the universe is because of the data that has been gathered for thousands of years by people who have dedicated themselves to this spirit and have passed it down. And like the system that I've moved through as I was getting my bachelor's degree and getting my PhD, and even after I got my PhD, the people from the past generation, my mentors, those people clearly love science and math. Yeah. And when they see someone coming up through the ranks, it's just like this loving embrace. How do I instill the spirit in this person and take care of them? My mentors I've had have been phenomenal. And it's like if you look at some of the works that I've created, like I'm very proud of the adiabatic isometric mapping algorithm. Like I wrote that code, like I had to write the code, I had to go through and tweak it so that it worked. And I have this entire algorithm that I wrote that produces these convex triangulated surfaces in R3. It's like programming the universe like that comes from all this study. Like most people can't make that thing.
Yeah.
It's like the work that I did on the Wang and Yao quasi-local energy and the paper that I wrote on that, someone who doesn't dedicate thousands of hours of sacrifice their time to it cannot create that piece of art. Yeah. The fact that I created these things is proof that I've embodied this spirit and this world that I create in. Like I said, like when I write a paper and then submit it to a journal on general relativity, it's like the community has agreed that I have the power to create in that reality. Here's the reality of general relativity. Here are the rules of general relativity. Here's how this, here are the concepts. Here's the mathematics. Here's the differential geometry. This is a reality. And it's like you have been given authority to create in that space. And to me, I take that very seriously. Like it's the reality that I live in,
And like we're kind of saying earlier before we started recording is everyone needs to start to pay attention to what is your God. It's very easy to kind of just fall into that space of, well, this is what my parents told me. Like I can imagine a lot of people who are like, oh, well, I'm Christian because, I was raised Christian or whatever. But take a step back and ask yourself, what is your God? What has become your God? Because even if you claim to be a Christian, it's specifically in the Bible saying, hey, beware. You could pick a different God and just run with it. It says it in there.
Yeah.
So when you isolate the thing that, when you ask yourself that question, what is my God? What have I elevated to God's status in my life? Yeah. Essentially, you're asking yourself, what is this God mode I'm trying to achieve? For example, if I was someone who played a lot of Scrabble, I'm trying to be the best Scrabble player ever. Yeah. There's a God mode version of a Scrabble player.
Yes.
And that's what I'll probably never get there.
The ideal
but it's
Scrabble
like
player.
It's a journey that I'm making. It's almost like, this is my goal. This is the thing that matters to me. So everything I'm doing is to preserve these rules, preserve this reality, and achieve that God mode. So then you ask yourself though, because again, remember, we always say this, that, we are also gods. We are also creators.
Yeah.
So you are in your process of trying to achieve this God mode, or you're in your process of determining what is your God, start to look at the things that you worship.
Yeah.
Because it's somewhere in there.
So you mentioned, like, what do you worship and why? And so, and taking it seriously has to figure that out. And I think that, like, I want to kind of communicate the evolution of how I've gotten to the point where I've gotten. Because, I was raised Christian, and I considered myself Christian until I was about 21 or 22. Okay. And what it was, like I mentioned in past episodes, is that I believed, I considered myself Christian strongly. And then I took this world histories class when I was 15. And we went over Greek mythology. And in it, they mentioned that, like, back then people worship Greek mythology as like their legit religion, like how they thought reality was. And I was like, well, we know for a fact that we call it mythology in the name. So we all agree that it's not true now. But these people used to really believe this is how reality worked. And it made me question, how do I know that my reality and my God that I worship isn't exactly like that? That is something that is just not true, that people don't believe as true. And so one of the things that affected how I thought was within the my parents' household and the religion that I was raised in, there were particular ideas in it that I didn't necessarily agree with, and I would question. And I would sometimes see my parents not follow that specific rule to the T. And so I thought to myself then that if my belief on what reality is depends on what my parents believe, they falter in what they believe, then it's almost like being at the top of a totem pole where my parents are the base. And if they falter and I'm at the top of it, then I crumble. And so if I want to really have a belief system that I can trust, I have to be the base. So I have to build your own. I have to build it from the bottom myself. And so I have to verify and be comfortable with the things that I claim to believe. And so given that and the experience with the whole Greek mythology thing, I started exploring like the concepts of like, oh, well, how do I know what I believe is true? And what it led me down was after 6 years of consideration, I realized that the space that my parents had given me was too small. Like I needed to entertain more ideas to get the answers I was looking for. So I had to break down those walls of what was given to me as my reality. I had to break them down and let more ideas in. But the thing that really allowed me to do that is I remember once I was on this date with this girl, and the subject of religion came up. And at this point, it had been like 6 years, and I'd already been considering like, these questions. And this girl, she brought up the idea of, I was like, yeah, but the one reason why I believe in the God and everything is that I don't want, I was like, I don't want to, given this scenario, do something bad. I want to make good decisions. And she was like, so you're telling me that if you didn't like believe in this God or you didn't worship, that you would do something wrong in that situation? And I was like, no, I wouldn't do that. I would stick to my principles. And that's when I realized that I could remove that label without destroying the stuff that I think is valuable. As we've been saying, like I removed part of it, but I kept the core stuff that my parents had given me. And so after that, I spent from 21 to like 31 or 32. So about 10 years I spent as an atheist, just kind of grappling with these ideas until recently that I was able to kind of re-examine the Christianity and what my parents had taught me from this new perspective that I could have only gotten by breaking down those walls and going to explore.
And letting more ideas in.
Yeah, and so coming back to not being an atheist is something that, what was this, like a 20 some odd, well, how long was it? About 10 years of consideration before getting here. And so I just really take this process of what I believe and why seriously. Like I spend a lot of time thinking about it. And part of the point of this podcast is to communicate what we believe and why, and whether or not it sounds reasonable.
Because even for me, I had a very similar journey because, like I said, I grew up in a very religious family, and we'll pray every morning for an hour, and then every night for an hour every day, and then we went to church on Wednesdays and on Sundays. And then we also were heavily involved in like church programs. Like I was in a choir for a little bit. I actually explored being a pastor at one point where I would go around preaching. I was part of like an evangelical team. Like this was all I knew, for the longest time. And all of this, like you said, was built on this base that was handed to me by my parents, this foundation that they created for me. They chose what church we went to. And as you know, Christianity comes in all kinds of flavors.
Yeah.
So they picked the flavor, they chose all that, and I just went along with it. And I feel like I probably did not even get out of this until, when I was in college. And of course, I started to make some decisions on my own, which obviously and very clearly did not align with some of the teachings that my parents had given me. So there was this huge thing of shame that I carried around because I felt like, these are the rules of my world. These are the rules that were handed down to me of my reality to create my reality. These are the strategy guides, and I'm not following them.
Yeah.
And like you said, even just watching your parents start to like break some of these rules over time was very significant in me starting to re-examine everything from scratch all over again. Yeah. So after I started to really see my parents as actual fallible people, like, people who make mistakes, they fail, they say one thing, they do another thing, I started to question the absoluteness of all of this.
Yeah.
So once, like you said, I broke down those walls, it's a very scary place to be. It's almost like that episode of Love, Death, and Robots. Where that dude gets off the train.
Yeah, goes into the tall
so
grass.
I literally got off the train. I was in the tall grass for nearly 5 or 6 years, bumbling around. And this was during the time where we started to have conversations about things like this. And one of the things that really, really hit me was when I realized that I had been living my life largely, and I don't know if this is based off of, my parents or just how I interpreted things, based off of this idea of a reward and punishment. Like, hey, do this good thing so you might get to heaven. If you do this, you'll go to hell. So I was making all my decisions based off of, I don't want God to punish me. I don't want... And then you take a step back and go, wait a minute. We live in a world that's so dynamic. It's constantly changing. It can't be this good or bad idea. I have to really think through everything I'm doing independently of any of the old information I have.
Yeah.
So going through the process and recreating your reality all over again, it's a huge task.
It's a huge undertaking. Yeah.
For anybody to do. And that is the reason why, I can't see anything, I can't fault religion too much because it gives you a strategy guide.
Yeah.
You at the very least, it gives you some guidance into this vast options that you have. Yes. Because every move you make, you're stuck with 5, 6, 7, 10 almost choices.
And you have to be able to ask yourself, does my God love me? And you have to ask that, because when you make a decision based off of the rules of your God, did it put you in did it give you an advantage? Mm-hmm. Did it bring pain and suffering? Or did it avoid pain and suffering? And one of the things that I like, as viewing myself as, not an atheist anymore, is my relationship with Christianity. And my relationship with Christianity comes directly from my parents. And so it's actually funny because I was talking to my mom last night, and it just felt really good to be talking to her in her reality, because when I said that I was an atheist, like my household with my parents, they had very strict rules on things like how to take care of yourself, brush your teeth, clean your room, all this. So like they had all these rules for how to take care of yourself. And then they had the religious rules that they gave of like going to church. But it was always clear to me that when I got older, I could do whatever I wanted. And so I never, there was never any pressure from my family that was like, if you don't believe in our God the way we believe in it, then you will be cast out from the family. It was never anything like that. It was like, oh, if you do that, then it's up to you. That's your decision to make. And so I remember when I told my mom that I was an atheist, and I could see the look on her face. It wasn't like, it was just a deflation, like a sadness that she could feel. It's like, my son doesn't live in my reality. He doesn't worship my God. And I remember it's funny because after I moved out of my parents' house and I was going out through the world and was making my own decisions, I always lived by the rules that they gave me on how to take care of myself, how to behave in public, how to treat others, don't be deceitful, don't do all these things. I remember that, and it was that ability to hold on to those rules without having the label that meant that I was still protected by their spirit, the spirit of my parents. It was still protecting me and taking care of me. And it was really merely a label switch. I didn't really change as a person. It was just a label, but getting rid of that label let me explore more things. But what ended up happening is, within the last year or two, I went back to Wichita. Eunice and I went back to Wichita. And the church I went to as a kid, like I was saying, is in rural Oklahoma. And the reason why we go to that church is because my mom's grandparents went to that church. Okay. And so my mom was raised in part by her grandparents. These are like farmers in Hutchinson, Kansas. So rural Kansas farmers is who my parents were, or my mom was raised by. And whenever you hear her talk about her grandparents, it is always like, in their world, when I was at their house, in their reality, everything felt safe and calm. You can tell that her choice of going to that church in Oklahoma was because her grandparents went there. And so that church is like, her grandparents went there and her grandpa's mom went there. So that's that's grandpa's mom, my mom's grandma, great grandma went there. Her grandpa, my mom. So it's like my mom's great grandma, her grandpa, her dad and his siblings, my mom and me. That's 5 generations going to that one church. So that church is like my base spirit. Yeah. It is the foundation from which all other spirits that I attach have come from. Like the fact that I can have a stable enough life so that I can have the freedom to study for hours to become a scientist is only because I was following the rules that was given to my mom by that building. And so when I went back to visit her, like I hadn't gone to that church in like, I don't know, probably like 15 years or something like that. But when I went there, the church was look identically the same because the people who are in charge of it, they take care of it. They make it stable because it is the holy building. And so
it's their temple.
Yes, they preserve it. So I went back like, wow, this is really well taken care of. And when I went in there and I started listening to the preacher, which was someone when I was younger, his name was Clayton. He wasn't the elder of the church. Mm-hmm. We had other elders that preached, and now he had become the elder of the church. And I went in there and I realized something. I have pretty much preserved the constraints of this church. Like when I walked into that building, I did not feel shame because I had lived in accordance with the rules of this place, that when I walked back in there, I could say to myself, I have preserved the spirit of this place.
And that's exactly how I feel too. Because go ahead.
Yeah. And I was going to say that when you realize that this is what your spirit comes from, this is what you worship, it actually felt really good to go back to my mom and tell her with confidence and understanding what I'm saying that I believe in your God. Yeah. I believe in your God, and the foundation of my mom's world is Christianity. And so in this sense, it's like the foundation of my spirit is the spirit of Christ as passed down to me by my parents in that church.
Yeah, and even if you don't have that label of Christian, or you go to church or anything like that, like for me, just the moment I was able to observe, my life, my actions, and my choices, and how I move through the universe and interact with people, and see that, oh wait, I could just follow these rules without worrying about the promise of heaven or hell. That was kind of just how I was able to just walk away from it. It's like, I am not going out into the world breaking all of these rules that were handed down to me. The only difference right now is that I'm getting rid of that label, like you said, so I can explore more ideas.
Yeah.
Because there's so much, that's been baked into a lot of, these types of religious beliefs, to where it keeps you it creates this constraint around you that sometimes could prevent you from exploring other ideas.
Yep.
And so being able to explore those other ideas knowing that, okay, your base spirit is still intact to where you're moving through the world and you're still keeping these rules and preserving this spirit.
Yep.
That's the first step in you trying to figure out, what is my God?
Yes.
And not the ones that my parents created for me, the ones that, what is my God?
Yes. And one thing that I wanted to mention was when you're saying like what is my God, and like does your God love you? Yeah. It's like when I was talking about the idea of the Christian part of my spirit and whether or not that God loves me, that was passed to me by my parents. Yeah. So, and I know the power of that God. It has protected me up to this point in my life. Like when I'm struggling, I think back to, okay, what did my parents teach me? What do I do? Like, given this situation, what do I do? And I just follow my parents' playbook in a lot of ways in which it's applicable. And I know that takes care of me. And so whether or not the Spirit of Christ is a God that takes care of you, at least my understanding through it from my parents, I know it loves me because, for one, it came from my parents, and for two, whenever I follow those rules, I'm taken care of. Yeah. And so it's another way to determine, like, what are the fruits that are born from following the Spirit. The
Spirit, yeah. That's a good way to kind of really evaluate it.
Yeah.
Where does following these rules lead me?
Where does it lead you? And this is something that Jesus actually mentions in the Bible, is the idea of looking at the fruits that are like what fruits are born from the tree,
From the tree.
And you look at the fruit from the tree of what you're following, and it's like, if this thing says it loves you, and it's saying, oh, I'm taking care of you, and it's like being in an abusive relationship. It says it loves you, but it's always making these decisions that make you suffer. And it's like, okay, you're a tree that bears fruit of suffering. I'm not going to follow you.
Follow you, yeah. And it's just something that I hope people listening to this podcast start to take away from this is, we're not saying that we've figured out, what God you should follow or whatever, because I think that is a personal choice that everyone has to make, but you need to really ask yourself if this is really your God, not your parents' God that you just latched onto and you're not even concerned what is the base of it. It's kind of like how we talked about. But what is your God on a personal level? Like what strategy guide do you follow to create your reality? Where does following these rules lead you? Yeah. What fruits does it bear? Like, these are the questions you have to ask yourself almost on a daily basis to make sure, you're on the right track.
And this is a good transition into the idea of what we're trying to communicate in this podcast. Like, I'm not communicating my Christianness or my science-ness to say you should follow these things. It's more like what we want to communicate is the concept of God. Like, what are the like in the pointing in the continuum, we talk about the idea of spirit or the idea of vampire. And if you remove from the idea of vampire the supernatural parts of sucking blood and turning into a bat, and you just
what is a vampire?
Yeah, and you just keep the concept of like an energy vampire, someone that sucks energy for their own sustenance from you. And so this thing can be like a vampire without the supernaturalness that manifests itself. And so we're trying to take the concepts, the ideas and concepts that are correlated to God. And we, as we've been saying in this episode, one of the concepts that's correlated is that people take it very seriously. This is something that you do not bring up lightly when you bring up someone's God.
People kill for their gods.
People die over
I've been doing that for years.
So that's one thing that anyone can observe. This is data that anyone can observe that's correlated to the concept of God. Another one is it's part of people's identity and part of people's idea of self. So that's another thing that people can verify just by going through the world and looking at people's belief in God, that it's related to what you see as the self. It's related to what you worship and what you find sacred. And it's often related to the concept of a creator or a creator of realities. Yes. These are observable data about the concept that anyone can verify. And the point is that we want to discuss the concept of God so that people are more aware of what they're giving access to their God core. God, like, yes. What spirits do you let inside of your mind and your heart, and how do they create Are they putting you in a better advantage? Are they taking care of you? Is that person on YouTube trying to tell you what reality is? Are they doing that to feed themselves, but by giving you delusions? Or is this an actual source you can trust? Who are you giving access to your creator of reality in your mind?
And who are you giving that access to? Who are you worshiping?
Yes.
What are you taking on as part of your identity?
Yes.
What are you taking, seriously? What are the things that you're willing to fight for, to protect, to, preserve? These questions, you have to answer all these questions all by yourself.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, if you rely on, my parents, this is how they did it or whatever, you're on pretty shaky ground.
Maybe, assuming, but that's the thing. It depends because
it's not saying it's wrong. It's not saying it won't work, but it's like
you better hope that your parents. Yeah, but that's the whole point. Is you gotta hope that your parents worship the actual God that loves you, and if and if you're not taking the time to re-examine whether or not the thing that was passed on to you loves you, you might be making decisions that's putting yourself in a worse position. So it's not the case that if you just blindly follow the religion given to your parents that it will necessarily mean that you're going to fall into calamity or something's wrong, but you just better hope that spirit that was given to you really does love you, and you got to be aware of that.
And at some point, you can't blame anybody else for that, though, because, most of us have cell phones that we scroll endlessly for hours. It's a whole brick of information in our hands. So you can't really blame anybody else if, you keep following these rules that lead you lead you to create a worse reality for you.
Yep.
Simply off of, well, this is just what we do in my family. Yeah. This is just how we do it.
Yeah.
No. So, you have to really examine and ask yourself those questions. What's creating my reality? What am I worshiping? What's part of my identity? Like those type of questions. And we don't know the answer that you're going to come up with. Yeah. We don't know. Well, that's the whole point. Our personal answers.
Yes. But that's the whole point is that I love talking to people about what they believe, what their gods are. I love it. You know why I love it? Because a lot of people have good ideas that you didn't consider. And so it's like, and so one of the things about this concept of God is that you can think of God as being a character in each of the different bottom turtle perspectives. And so, like we've been saying in the past, that when we're trying to talk about how to generate all of the bottom turtle perspectives, all of the, ways of interpreting reality, we're doing it from the idea of causal structure, input to output. When X, then Y because of Z, where Z is your worldview. Z is the thing that takes the input Y and maps to X. Like Z is that thing is your God. And so,
it's your why.
Huh?
It's your why.
No, when X then Y. I'd say it's the Z, right?
No, I mean, not why. I mean,
it's the why you do it. Yeah. It's why. Yeah, it's the why. It's your model of reality. Yeah. Dang, what was I bringing that up for? Because it had to do with the. So. The different bottom turtle perspectives, and it's like. You can from one perspective you can think of God as being the judge, because with this causal structure, every time you come up to something you have to judge it. So you have to judge the spirit of this thing, and through that judgment, that then creates an interpretation, which then determines how you interact with it. And so you're judging things all the way down. In this case, God in that context is the judge. The judge creates reality, like the MMA thing we're saying. Like if two MMA fighters are fighting and the fight goes to a decision, the judges determine who wins, and whoever wins determines the reality, and who, and that reality is the one
champion who gets the endorsement.
Exactly.
All of that, it just
who gets
creates
paid.
The reality. Who gets paid more than this guy?
Who we all agree in our collective imagination of reality who the champion is. The judges
who's
created
than
that.
Who?
Yes.
All of that.
So the judges in that sense are the creator of reality. And so that's one sense in which you can think of God. What is God? God is the judge. And then another one is like, well, what is God? Well, God is the creator of the rules. God is the rules. Because if you follow the rules of the God you believe, then you take actions that are consistent with its will, which rules preserves its spirit, which then allows you to embody the spirit of that God. So then it's like God is the thing that creates the rules. Did you want to jump in there and see if you were?
Oh yeah, like God is the thing that I hold dear, that I worship, that I'm making the effort to preserve.
Yeah.
Think about like me, for example.
Yeah.
I remember that a couple of years ago, don't want to say a couple of years ago, but for the most part of my life, I worked in aviation for such a long time, and me deciding that I wanted to make the switch and do something design related, I knew that I had to like dedicate myself to this God.
Yeah. Yes.
It was either that or I would just never succeed.
You knew what you were doing.
I literally knew that, well, I just have to dedicate myself to this God. And in my spare time, I'm designing something, I'm drawing something. Yeah. That is me reading the Bible. That's me going to church. That's me paying my tithe. That's my God, my reality. That's just where I live now.
Yes.
And these are the rules. The rules are, hey, you can't put this color next to this color because, kids won't like it. You can't put this text next to this text because people can't read it. Yeah. It's like, if you don't follow these rules, you will not succeed. You won't get more work.
Yes. Which then creates the space that you create. And like we've been saying, like you have some constraints. So like we've been saying, like if you go back to all the episodes, like minds and computer algorithms, we talk about the idea of spaces and how they're created. And so you can imagine going to the inconceivable state of Buddhahood, which is this state of mind where you have the freedom to be put in any configuration possible. So an example that we used in the past is like imagine an iPhone that has no software on it. It doesn't have an operating system or nothing. It's just a physical device that has the possibility to be put in any configuration, because if you start saving videos on it, you start taking pictures, that takes up data.
Even when you put an operating system on it, it becomes a thing now.
It becomes a thing. Yeah, you mapped it from all the things that could be into that one thing. And so the more memory or data or information you put on it, the more constraints there are, the less freedom it has to be in another configuration. So go back and imagine the idea of being in the state where you have complete freedom as a human to be put in any configuration possible of your physical system. You're not thinking of anything. So you're not thinking of people. You're not thinking, like, you have the potential to be put in a configuration to
You're
think
not
of
weighing
anything.
one thing over one thing. None of that.
It's all complete freedom. And then imagine that someone says, okay, now that you're in the space of all things you can imagine, now it's just taken one constraint, people. Now suddenly that constraint of people, you have to be thinking of concepts associated with people, you have to be thinking about specific people, that reduces the space that you're working in. So instead of all things, now you're working in the space of people. Then you add another constraint, American. So then that makes another constraint. And as you add more constraints, then it excludes some concepts and includes the ones that are consistent with the constraints. And then that's your world. That's the reality that you have freedom to create in. And whenever you, Oyani, are going through and someone comes to you and says, hey, I want you to design a restaurant menu, you can't, those constraints create a world that you then have to create in. And there are rules in that world that determine whether or not you play the games. And so, again, in this sense, you can think of, because there are rules associated with your God, it creates constraints, which then creates a particular reality that you are allowed to operate in. And so that's another one of these perspectives where you can think of God is the constraints that create the worlds, just like my parents creating the rules of the world in their house that made the constraints of what I was allowed to do there, which then developed a particular spirit, which was me and my siblings.
Yeah. And I think overall, the one thing that I think everyone needs to hold very, very dear to their hearts is that your God plays a huge role in creating your reality for you.
It creates your reality. I think that's yeah. Well, I guess it doesn't. It plays a huge role because there are other people interacting.
Exactly.
So someone else can come along. Yeah.
Yes. So the thing that you hold on to as your God, that you identify as your God, creates your reality. A huge portion of it.
Yep.
And so it is something that you have to take seriously.
Yeah.
You have to ask yourself this question often enough, is this thing still my God? It's another question you have to ask yourself. Or am I just telling myself it is, but all of the rules I'm making is completely opposite to that thing?
Well, yeah, and it's also to the point, it's like, so one thing that I think, going to what you're saying about like the God's creating your reality. And it goes to the fact that in this podcast, whenever you go out and you take the time to listen to someone, Like if you go in, you're listening to some sort of political commentator. You're watching MSNBC. You're watching CNN. You're watching some person on YouTube who's trying to tell you how it is. You're watching UFC, and the commentators are telling you what's going on play by play.
The history.
Well, not necessarily the history, but like someone, this guy punched this guy. He's rocked. He's rocked. It's like, well, sometimes they get it wrong. Sometimes he's not rocked. But, as they're doing that, they're creating a narrative. And again, this is another the bottom turtle perspective. God is like the narrator. It's like it's narrating the story. And so whenever you're out in the world, you're essentially giving people access to your mind, because as you take in that data, it changes you from one configuration to another configuration, which affects your model of reality. And so you have to always be questioning, what information are people giving me? Why are they giving it to me? And am I allowing someone to control me like a puppet? And so once you understand the idea that these media outlets and all this data you consume affects which spirits you embody, which then affects how you create, it affects the collective reality that we all live in. So then you have to ask yourself, step back and go, okay, which gods in our collective society have the power to create reality?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, because all of these people on media and everyone who's talking to you, they are changing your configuration, which means they're putting a particular spirit in your mind. And so if someone inceptions you with a certain way of thinking, this is how things are, and then you go and create assuming that's how reality is, you are essentially giving your system as a vessel to that spirit so that it can create the reality that we all live in. And so you have to start, so when you start perceiving things this way, you can start seeing like, which gods are creating the reality? Which gods have we given the most power to create the reality that we all live in?
Gods am I given the power to create my reality?
Yeah, I mean, it's I and the individual, but if one person imparts a spirit into 30 people, now suddenly that spirit has 30 vessels to create with.
To create with.
Yes, and then imagine to give it to 1,000 people or 1,000,000 people.
Imagine each one of them gives it to 30 more people.
Yes.
Yeah. And it's like an exponential spread of these ideas that then in turn create the reality we
all live in. Yes. And so one reason why I like looking at this from the perspective of God is because the reason why I like the word God is because it's deeply personal. It is a big deal. It is serious. It determines what you worship. It determines how you create. It determines which realities are created in your own mind. It is a big deal. So it is a big deal to give people access to your God cord, to your vessel. And you have to really be questioning, okay, when I'm looking at the landscape of reality and I'm looking at the state of our, what we argue about, what we bicker about, what's going on in our society, which gods, which spirits are the things that are controlling what we talk about? Yeah. What do we get angry about? What are the things that we find important in the news?
And for me, I think it's great to see it, from a wide lens view to where you're observing our reality as a collective almost. But you can also do the same thing. You can do the same on a personal level, because I think that if each person asks themselves this question personally, not about not from the point of view of, the collective, it will start to have an impact to where each person is taking control.
Yes.
Of their minds enough to where it starts to spread. Because I was thinking about this last night. I was just thinking about the podcast, and I was on Reddit, and it was someone had posted something about a new bill was passed, something about insulin, the cost of insulin.
Oh yeah, I've seen this.
$35, blah 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 blah.
I've seen this around, yeah.
And I saw that, and it was like, okay, this is good. And I'm reading through the comments, and people are trying to point out that, this is kind of not a true fix to the problem, because insurance companies can just hike up your premiums anyway, and then we've pretty much not solved anything. It's like, you want us to pay $35? Well, we're just going to hike up your premiums anyway to cover the difference. And I'm reading through these comments and I'm like, okay, that makes sense. And then I keep reading people saying, well, all this is fake. You know, Biden took away Trump's, what's the thing he said? Biden took away Trump's, insulin. He reduced the price of insulin or something. And when Biden came into power, he removed the protections. Yeah, it was some protections to the cost. So Biden came in power and removed the protections. And I was like, man, this is not consistent though with what I know Biden would do. Like there has to be a reason why he took that away.
Yeah.
I actually went and looked for the PDF of the specific thing.
Of the bill, of the actual...
Of the bill, what Biden did. And essentially what it was, of what Trump did was they capped the cost of insulin to a certain price for public health centers. Mm-hmm. It was just for like a small population of the country that he did it for. People who go to the public health centers to get help was what it's for. And most of the narrative that's out there is insulin was cheaper, Biden came in, erased the price. That's literally how I was reading it. As a matter of fact, that was the headline of the post.
You know what's interesting to me? Because whenever I'm searching through it, what I see are people, like the narrative that I see around this particular topic is Republicans refused to vote to cap the price of insulin. So it's interesting because I think I've come across it on a few times on Reddit and a few times on Facebook. People have posted this, and I have not taken any time to look into it. So I don't know anything other than these headlines I've seen. But the association I've had with it is everyone is saying something like the Republicans didn't vote to cap this thing and they're evil for it.
No. That's not, because the whole thing, there's so much more nuance to that whole thing.
Oh, yeah.
Where there's a huge portion of the Republican Party that's kind of pointing their fingers saying, yeah, this is not what we want, though. Because insurance companies are still going to circumvent this anyway by raising premiums.
Yeah.
So a lot of people who are against it on the Republican side, that's where they're coming from. Of course, there's some who are just against whatever the Democrats are putting out or whatever.
Yeah.
I am not saying this to say one point of view is better than the other.
Yeah.
That's not what I'm saying. Yeah. What I'm trying to illustrate with this is this. You have to be aware of how your reality is curated.
Yes.
Because imagine if I had just gone through that thing and went, Biden, he raised the cost of insulin anyway. And I just left with that. Yeah. That is literally the reality in my head.
And you just left it at that. And
you think, Biden, look at that guy. He says he's a great guy.
And then you
I just X'd it out and just walked away. And then I go online, I tweeted it, I shared it, I retweeted, I tell my friends, and we're just creating this reality that's just based on shit that's not even true.
And not only that, but you've this is more evidence that the spirit that you've modeled of Biden is like this evil person. And so it's so like you're just going through, you read that thing, you take that one speck of information, and you start having hatred for another person because of it. Like you start hating Joe Biden more. Because of this thing, and it's like, but yeah,
you just create this reality, and these things have weight.
Yeah,
and we all need to start to like really, really be aware of who we let or what we let create that reality.
Yeah, and that's one reason why I'm really appreciative of people who listen to this show, because I have my own social media people that I listen to, and people that I pay attention to, and for example, recently I started listening to this guy Zubin Damania, and I came across him because of the whole Joe Rogan scandal thing about him having those doctors on, I think Peter Malone and that other guy, whatever, the guys who were anti-vaccine or whatever. And so I remember listening to those Joe Rogan episodes, and I remember coming away from it going, I have absolutely no credentials to verify what the hell these people are saying. Like, what is even being said here? And so I actually went and started looking for someone, like other doctors, to like break down some of the content in there. And one of the people I came across was this Zubin Damania guy. And so recently I've been listening to a couple of his podcasts and stuff. And so I basically have put this person as a regular
in your rotation,
as a regular rotation into how I'm getting my data fed. And it's like there's a degree to which I'm trusting this person to create my reality in a space that I don't have the credentials to verify. And
that's a big deal.
It's a big deal. And so as I'm listening to this person, I have to always like have a grain of salt with what he's saying, because I'm not verifying it and he might be giving me some emotional stuff that's not reliable. But at the same time, for some reason, I've decided that at this current moment, I'm trusting this person. Yeah. And so this is something that you're always doing when you have people in rotation on your social media or on social media who you listen to. And so for people to take the time to listen to this podcast, it really means a lot, because you're saying that whatever is the content is of the show, it's valuable enough to you that you would take the time to listen and consider our ideas and allow us to communicate our reality with you. And
at
so,
the very least, you're giving us a chance to curate your reality.
Yes.
And that is a big deal.
It is. It's a huge, it's a very intimate thing. And so to me, the fact that we have listeners at all, like I'm always grateful for every download we get. And it's one of those things to where I always tell myself, like, you are not owed anything. No one owes you to listen to what you're saying. The fact that people are willing to take the time to listen is very meaningful, but it is the case that this is what it means to communicate. Like, why do you think that people create art? When someone creates a movie, when someone creates a song, they're trying to communicate something about their spirit to you. And if it speaks to you, then that communication should affect how you program the universe. So it affects your spirit, what spirits you embody.
And it's just great, because this is our 21st episode we're recording?
Yeah, 21st
episode. And I think overall I'm just happy that we're able to get these ideas out there, especially with the world that we've built from the first season.
Yeah.
Because I was thinking about that earlier today, and I said to myself that whatever we end up doing next, like, in the third season, we have so much, foundation that we've created for some of these ideas, to where, we can always reach back, which we do all the time, to where we say, oh, remember what we said, and point in the continuum and blah, blah, blah. And it's such a beautiful thing to then package this podcast again, thanks to capitalism, I always say. We can package this podcast and put it out, and people can listen to it. And we appreciate that. But the one thing that I want people to keep in mind is it is a privilege, that you are allowing us to do that.
Oh,
and
yeah,
you have to start to treat every time you interact with things online or information like, who is this guy? Who is this guy? Why am I giving him the opportunity to maybe program me?
Yes.
Because not to say you might be programmed every time, but who am I giving this opportunity to?
Yeah.
And how you curate your social media feeds, and how you curate what you listen to, the movies, the ideas or concepts you associate with. That question has to always be in the back of your mind. At least it is on the back of my mind for me, is who am I giving this access to? Because that is a big deal.
And one of the reasons why it's a big deal to me is because I don't want to be spreading misery, you know? One of the things when I think about the concept of God, I kind of break it up into two different things in my mind. There is the conceptual God, and then there is like the physical God. And what I mean by that is when I am trying to imagine the set of all spirits I can embody. So this can go back to the idea an archetypes and eternal spirits. We're looking at these Jungian archetypes. Like, think of each Jungian archetype as a potential spirit that you can embody in the space of all spirits. And remember, when we're talking about the space of all spirits, we tie that to the physical using no mentation without representation, because every mental state coincides with a different physical state. And so your mental states affect how you react to stimuli, which determines how you program the universe, which means that your physical configuration is associated to which spirits you embody. And so you can always think of different physical configurations as being associated with a different location in the space of configurations and a different location in the space of spirits. And so given that, I think of like the conceptual space as being like this space of spirits that I could possibly embody. And so the one conceptual spirit that is my ideal, like my set of ideals that point in this direction in the space of spirits, that's like my North Star in the conceptual space that determines what I'm worshiping, what I'm working towards. I'm trying to bring that spirit into existence by changing my physical configuration to live in accordance with its will. And so that's one way I view God in terms of the conceptual God, or the God in the space of spirits, or the conceptual space. But the other way is you can view it in terms of the physical God, like the physical system that you're actually trying to preserve. It's like the physical system, the spirit of the physical system that you worship. And so the physical system that I worship over everything else is the human configuration, the human spirit. And so to me, when I'm thinking about the idea of the self, one thing that is true for all humans by definition is that we all have the human spirit, the human configuration. And so when we look at how we conceptualize reality, the human spirit is the thing that gives us all of our experiences, all of our ways of conceptualizing, all of our ways of imagining. Every interaction we have with the universe is filtered through the human configuration. So that thing creates our reality. It is a creator of realities. And to me, it is a spirit that has come into existence over millions of years of evolution and has come to existence to be in this state the way it is now. And so just going back to what we were saying with the whole thing as scientists, and imagine all scientists, all data associated with science that has been developed just going away overnight due to your actions or due to someone else's actions. Think about the same thing with the human spirit. Because if people take actions and it ends in an extinction event of all humans, then the likelihood that spirit will ever come into existence again is pretty much zero. And so when I'm making decisions about what spirits I embody, what rules I follow, which games I play, what I value, I'm looking at it in the context of, is this a loving decision to the human spirit? Am I spreading misery in my society? Am I taking care of the human spirit? And so to me, a lot of what motivates my behavior and thought is, how does this affect the human spirit? And am I making loving decisions to that self?
The human spirit, yeah. Am I protecting it? I see what you mean.
Because then when I say I'm living a life in service to God, I'm living a life in service to humanity, which means that when I, for example, don't want to, want to preserve the relationship with my wife, like imagine that I go out and I cheat on my wife with someone else who's married. Suddenly you have our family that goes into chaos. You have that other family that goes into chaos. You have all the relationships of the two families of people around it that's being thrown into chaos. And it's like you are just spreading this misery everywhere. And so it's like that is just a step that cannot be taken. You know what I mean? Because it is not a loving decision that preserves
preservation of the human spirit.
Yes, it's not a loving decision toward God, to the human spirit. And so a lot of the decisions I make and everything is associated with, am I preserving the spirit? Am I taking care of that spirit? And what that means is that I see God in all humans, And as humans, the human spirit has this amazing capacity to create. There is nothing on the planet that creates like us. Our God is stupidly powerful.
Sometimes sometimes when I'm out driving, I just look at some of the things that the human spirit is being able to bring into existence, and it's like we've run into a situation where we take a lot of this stuff for granted, like the things we've been able to accomplish, over the years, how we've been able to program our universe and just reshape our realities. It's phenomenal.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And we need to take the time to appreciate that and do our individual parts in preserving it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's the thing. Like, one thing that blows my mind about it is we're in this system to where we can just go on our phone, order something, and it just appears on our porch like a day later.
Sorcery. It's sorcery. That's what it is. It's straight up sorcery.
And the reason why it's sorcery is because all the moving parts that make that work, like I am totally unconscious to all of the systems that we've created that make it to where when I take this action, this set of events occur, the sequence of events occurs such that now this package
it takes about 3 steps. You could open the Amazon app right now and click on something and click buy now, and you are done. It shows up at your door.
Shows up at your door. Yeah.
That is not any more difficult than saying abracadabra.
Abracadabra. Yeah, that's true.
It's not any different from that.
Yeah,
because even now you can hey Siri, order me a new blah blah blah. That is not any different from saying supercalifragilistic or whatever it is, and something appears in front of your door. It is sorcery, and we need to start to appreciate that more. Being able to do.
Yeah, no, I try not to take anything for granted. Yeah. Like one way that I kind of view why to live, like why exist, like why take care of the human system. Because one way that I view this is, what is the thing that's doing the worshiping? And I view the thing that's doing the worshiping as like the consciousness, like the thing that says, I am Shannon, is the thing that's saying, this is what I'm worshiping. These are the rules I'm willing to follow and stuff like that. And so as the consciousness doing the worshiping, I view the consciousness as a system that was born from the human configuration, because in my perspective, and of course it's just how I see things, that you can disagree or whatever, but when I view what I worship, ultimately it is the human spirit, so as the consciousness, I view that one of my central duties was why I exist, my responsibility is to take care of the human spirit. And I view that as a responsibility in the same way that the digestive system has a responsibility, the immune system has a responsibility. Like, it has a job, it has a purpose. And so as the consciousness, it's almost like the system birthed us from it. Like, we were born from God and given the responsibility to make decisions to take care of God, to take care of the system. And so given that, it's like we have a bargain with God. So the consciousness has a bargain with God. It's like this thing that's like, it's aware of itself now. And given that level of awareness, it can use that level of awareness of self to kind of make predictions about the future state of the self. And then based off those predictions, it can veto certain signals and make certain decisions to bring one reality into existence versus another reality into existence. Yeah. So I think the consciousness is tied to the ideas of free will, which we're not going to get into here now, but those arguments can be had later. But I think the consciousness is tied to the idea of free will, to the ability to create. And so because the consciousness has been given so much power to create, it has this huge responsibility, but there's a lot of suffering in existing. Like, there's a whole lot of suffering that happens. And so the consciousness might ask itself, why am I going through all this suffering? Like, what's the point of living? What's the point of existence? And I think that this is the bargain that the consciousness has with God. It is that in exchange for taking care of God and making loving decisions and worshiping it, you get experience. You get the experience of living, the experience of creating. And I think that when you look at the human spirit and you think of every moment you've ever had that was a loving, joyous occasion that you've had with family and friends, and you think about that, none of that's possible without the human configuration, without the human spirit. And so it's that sense in which that bargain is, I make loving decisions to God. In exchange, I get experience. And I feel like for me, that XP is
points. Get some XP points.
Yeah. You get the XP points. You get to feel the joys of laughter. You get to feel all these things, and then you suffer through. And this is actually encapsulated in a song that I really liked as a kid. It was one of the little hymns we used to sing, but it's called "Count Your Blessings." It's like, count your blessings, name them one by one. Yeah, that. And I think the reason why it's important that you count your blessings is because when you're going through life and you're suffering, and you're asking yourself, why am I enduring this? Why am I going through this? When you count your blessings, you count all the things that God gives you that are worth preserving and worth loving, then you can remind yourself why you're doing this and why you're, and I actually mentioned, like, in that song, like, when the cross you've been given seems too heavy to bear, it's like, look at what God has done. And it's like, yeah, well, your bargain with God is that you take care of it, and in exchange you get experience. And that's just kind of how I view things,
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think we're gonna wrap it up here, guys. It's been another great season. I think this might probably be the last episode for the season, unless we do a part 2. We don't know yet, but probably not.
No. I don't know. We'll see.
No, but overall, I think I just want to express how much we appreciate you guys for listening while we record these episodes.
Before we end it, can we kind of do a summary of the... Yeah. Because, I feel like when recording this one this time, sometimes things come out far more structured, sometimes they don't. So I feel like this one is one that kind of moves all over the place a little more. So the overarching ideas might not have come through as clearly. But I don't know. We'll see when we.
I feel like they did, but we can do a quick summary.
Yeah. Because go ahead. Yeah, because in the outline, the whole idea was this. We start off with the argument from pointing in the continuum. We probably should have just done that at the beginning, but we start off with the argument in pointing in the continuum, which is that we're trying to use a concept and look at where it points, like the concept of spirit or the concept of vampire. And to do that, we look at the data associated with that concept, and then we try to consider that concept by removing all the supernatural aspects of it. From it. And so that we can make tie everything to the physical and make it more concrete, so that it can be communicated to everybody. And so when we looked at the concept of God, the things that we decided to use that are correlated to God are the concepts of people take it very seriously. Everyone can observe that. It's not a light thing to talk about God. So that is something, that's data that can be verified by everybody. That it is part of people's identity, part of this idea of self, that is associated with what you worship and what you hold sacred. And it's associated with being a creator of reality. And these are things that are often associated with God that can be verified by anyone. So given this association with God, we then wanted to move into a definition of what worship is. And we associate love with worship. We think that these two things are synonymous. And the reason why we claim that is because we know that as biochemical configurations, our systems are inherently unstable. And with no mentation, without representation, we know that different configurations of the system are associated with different mental states or different states of being. And different states of being are associated with how you react to stimuli. And how you react to stimuli determines how you're programmed and how you're programmed by the universe, which determines which experiences you have, which determines what feelings you have, which are associated with the reality that you move through and what's created for you. And so from there, we can see that the concept of worship is the idea of making a particular configuration stable, because you identify that configuration as a self, and as a consciousness, you are making decisions to put that self in a more advantageous position. And so through your fealty to the spirits that you worship, you make different decisions that create a specific configuration of your system to embody different spirits so that you create reality in accordance with that spirit. Yeah. That is the overarching argument. And then we're just trying to look at the consequences of it and what does it mean to give someone access to how you interpret reality. Yeah. Give them access to your worldview, and whether or not the spirits that you embody, depending on who you give access to your God core, whether or not those spirits love you or not, and you can determine that based off of what fruit they bear. Are they making decisions that are putting you or society in a worse position, or are they putting you and society in a better position? And it's up to us to take the time to really examine what we believe and why, so that we're not causing harm to others and ourselves. That's the overarching argument of this episode, basically.
And I think for me, the takeaway that I want most people who listen to walk away with is the weight of giving someone that power to shape your reality is something that we all have to consider seriously. And also we all have to routinely ask ourselves the question, what is my God? What am I worshiping?
Yep. And
keep that at the back of our mind as we go through the world and interact with people and try to create this, what spirit am I trying to preserve? What reality am I trying to bring into existence? And all of this is tied into what you worship and what you love.
Yep. And also, the one other thing that I wanted to get in at the end is the idea of listening to something sincerely. So as we were saying in the last episode of Space of Speculation, when talking about Gary Vee and Gordon Ramsay, and you look at someone like Gordon Ramsay and I ask myself, why do I allow this person to create my reality? And like I've said before, it's because I have been consuming data correlated to Gordon Ramsay for like 15 years or something. And one thing that I know about consuming his data and allowing him to create reality and allowing him to program me is that, for one, I feel safe. I don't feel like there's any deceit that will lead me to catastrophe. I like the values that he tries to instill in his in everything that he creates. I'm always like really inspired by the values. I like just the practical information on how to create more food. Like I create better food. Like these are all the things that when I'm looking at why I give this person the ability to program my spirit with their spirit, I look at what I get out of it, and what I get seemed to be very loving. And so, but the thing is I couldn't get that from him if I wasn't willing to listen sincerely, which is to say, willing to allow him to create my reality for me. And it goes back to what we were saying in liberals and conservatives. Remember when I was talking about how people write in mathematics where they say stuff like, let M be a space-time manifold with metric G. It's almost like when you go there, you can't go, I'm not going to let M be a space-time manifold with metric G. You know, you when you're reading these texts, you're saying to the person writing these texts that I am going to allow you to create a reality for me, and I'm going to live in it. I'm going to try to experience the reality that you're trying to create. And then you consider it while you're in there. But if you don't do the first step of letting someone build a reality for you to live in, which is to communicate to you, which is to share their art, if you don't do that step and try to really take what they're saying seriously, then you're not listening to them sincerely, and there could be, you can break down this mode of communication. And so, you know, in this podcast, we're trying to like, this podcast is, at least speaking for myself, what I believe in why, and I know that Oyani, a lot of it is what he believes in why, but we're not the same person. He thinks differently on certain things. But for me, it's what I believe and why, and I'm trying to sincerely communicate that to people. And I want people to think, like, why do you listen to this podcast? Like, what do you get out of it? And I really hope that, you know, I'm always trying to think of how can I be more convincing? What are the words? What are the things that I have to, what is the algorithm to communicate this as convincingly and effectively as possible? And is it working? Does this make sense? And if it doesn't make sense, then I want to know why, you know? Yeah.
I think that so far, I feel like we've been making good progress with getting some of these ideas out. I'm excited for the third season we're going to put out, because a lot of like the more heavy lifting concepts, we've kind of discussed them.
Yeah.
You know, at the very least, we've introduced them. So over time, we're going to start to use more practical, not more practical, I guess, more day-to-day, you know, conversations or happenings to kind of interpret our world and our reality and things going on based off of our worldview. And so we're going to be putting out more clips on social media, so that, you know, more people can interact in short snippets with these ideas. And at the same time, we also are going to, you know, set up a podcast and have a whole blog, set up a blog, you know, and get the website going and everything. So
yeah, and I've seen it too. Oyani had he had the pretty good amount of that done. So I've actually seen part of the website. Looks pretty nice.
Yeah, we're almost done with that. So it should be really nice, easy to navigate and find, you know, what you're looking for on there. So it should be great. But yeah, I'm loving this so far. I'm glad that we're able to get this topic of God and worship and love, you know, out of the way, because it's one of those things that we talk about a lot. And, you know, we wanted to share that with you guys.
And this is the show. It's when we say that the whole purpose of the show is to create a reality, to create a language for conceptualizing reality in terms of information. It is to say that we are trying to build a world. We're trying to build a reality. Like this
and that's
show,
what we've been doing for the past 2 seasons.
Yes, this show is like, when I get data and process it, these are the algorithms that are running in my head and are producing an interpretation of what I'm looking at, because what you embody, like, it determines how you see. Like, there's a strong association with the concept of, like, sight. Like I think that's another characteristic of God, or another bottom turtle version of God is the thing that gives sight. It is the thing that interprets reality and then renders a model of it, which is your worldview, which is how you see, and how you see affects how you program and move through the world. So like these are like always associate the concept of God with the concept of the creator of reality.
Yeah. So once you start to understand that, what that means is whoever or whatever ideas is your God, or how you move through the universe, it shapes your reality. And it's something that it's a power that you shouldn't hand out very lightly.
No, absolutely not.
You should not hand that out very lightly, because it creates the reality that you live in. And but that being said, guys,
should end it there.
Like always, we're gonna do the plugs. This is the last plug for the second season.
Man, I can't believe it.
That.
Congratulations
I
to
can't
us
believe
again.
we I don't know, right? I can't believe that we've put out 21 episodes of this. I was thinking about that earlier, but I'm really proud of it, man. I'm glad we stuck to it and kept doing it. So thanks for taking the time to listen to us and interact with us online.
And I really want to say that, like, and I'm sorry, I know you want to end it, but one thing that I really want to say is that creating this podcast, I actually sat down and thought about it, and I think that for each episode, I probably spend in the background about 15 hours for every episode that's produced. Yeah. I have to sacrifice 15 hours for every episode, and one of the reasons why I'm willing to make that sacrifice is my spirit. Like you have your consciousness and you have your subconscious, and there's a part of you that it sends you signals. Like if you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, it gives you good signals. If you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing, it punishes you, like it prods you. And part of the reason why I make these sacrifices is because I don't have a choice. Like in my mind, I do not have a choice. There's a part of my spirit that demands that I communicate this. And the best way to explain what I mean is, I remember one time I was at an MMA gym. I was at the MMA gym that I went to, and there was someone who was there watching the classes, and I sat down next to this person, and the person goes, "Why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? Why are you doing jiu-jitsu?" And what I told him was, I don't have a choice, because when I am at my deathbed and I'm at the end of my days and I'm reflecting on my life, the idea that I didn't go and study jiu-jitsu and I didn't actually like live a life and try to practice
especially
and study martial arts.
Interest in.
Yeah, like I don't want to live with the pain at the end of my life, knowing that I didn't live my life and didn't do the things that I know I wanted to do. And so in that sense, with these ideas as they've been developed, I don't want to live a life in which I don't communicate them and see how they program the universe. I have to know that answer. And so to me, this is like, again, the ideals in my mind, the gods that I worship, this is my sacrifice to them so I can create the art.
This is us doing evangelical work.
I don't say it like that, man. I don't want to say it like that, because the reason why I don't want to say it like that is because everyone who creates art is trying to communicate their spirit. Like,
yeah, that's all it is. Like,
the act of creating
art,
art,
it's not limited to Christianity alone.
It's not really. It's not. It's just part of being human. It's like a feature of the human spirit. The human spirit. One thing that makes it so powerful.
You want to spread your ideas.
Yeah. One thing that makes
communicate.
Yes, exactly. You want to share. You want to create art and share it, and hope that people get something out of it.
Everybody should do that with their ideas. You should believe passionately about your beliefs and your ideas and all of that enough to want to share it.
Yeah, because there was actually. I'm gonna just do this one more time because I think Jesus was pretty cool. I mean, as an adult, I'm serious.
I said it. I think Jesus is really cool.
I think he should be cool again. We need to bring that back, because as an adult and I go back and read a lot of his stuff, I'm like, man, this dude, like,
it's just regular stuff in there. Whether
or not he was a real person, or whether or not this is a character that someone wrote. This character is a very enlightened character, I think. And what was it? Oh yeah, this one. You are the light of the world. A city on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on a stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before men, and they may see your good deeds and praise your Father in heaven. Where
I know that shit by heart.
Where the Father in heaven is like these are the archetypal spirits that you worship, because when you present like as a scientist or something like that, you're saying like the archetype, like this, like it's like you're giving praise to your God. You're giving. It's like one thing I love that the Muslims do. Like whenever I watch Khabib Nurmagomedov fight or something like that, they always like give all praise to God. You know what I mean? And I think that phrase is like all praise to the parts of the self that I've worshipped that allow me to create in the way that I create. And so when you give praise to the archetypes, to the gods that aren't yourself, then other people can see that and be like, I want to embody that spirit. And then like that. Yeah. And then that spirit gets spread onto other people, and then that spirit starts to be able to create reality the more people it spreads on. So when you do an act or a deed and you give praise to your God, someone giving praise to Jesus or someone giving praise to Allah or Buddha or whoever, they're saying like, look at what this God creates when you embody its spirit. And actually, there was this fighter in UFC, his name is Bryce Mitchell, and I think you would have really liked this, because in the last episode when we were talking about that person who was saying that if you pray, then you can get people's actions, like they can affect people's actions through prayer. Remember that?
Yeah, I remember.
So what I found interesting is in Bryce Mitchell's last fight, he fought Edson Barboza and just dominated him. And his post-fight speech that he gave in the octagon, he was saying that he was saying, I'm donating my entire fight purse that I got or $45,000. He said he's donating $45,000 to these children at at a children's hospital so they can be healed. And his statement was, I am doing this in the name of God. These children will be healed in the name of God. This is what this guy said. And so think about it. What he's saying is, I worship this God. This is what this God demands of me. And so I'm going to give this money in his name so that these children will be healed by God. So what does that do? What that does is now it'll affect how other people program it. If they see that act and go, that's how his God programs, I'm also going to donate to these children. Or they see him doing that, I'm going to donate to these children.
There is a whole thing in the Bible about this, bro.
But the crazy
specifically says your acts is what people will emulate to create reality, and then it just goes on.
Oh yeah, man. I mean, the Bible is full of a lot of gems, but what the point is that, like what you were saying before, is that it's not like this is the physical link as to how you can see how your prayers or your actions to God will affect how other people behave. Because now that this person said that, someone might go, I'm inspired to also give to these children, because now you can see how someone's belief in God has actually affected someone else's behavior so that these children get healed, or $10,000 goes in soman's bank randomly. It's through your acts, not just by sitting in a room and praying and just having it happen magically.
Oh man, it's just what people want to happen.
Yeah.
But yeah, man, I'm glad we're putting these ideas out there. I'm just glad that we have been able to put out this many episodes. 21 episodes is quite a lot. So you know, and I feel like sometimes I always tell myself, you know what? Yeah, this is going to live on forever. It's fine.
Yeah. Hopefully,
this is just going to exist now. It's fine. Yeah.
As long as there are humans to interpret it. Yeah. Oh yeah, and also wanted to shout out to the Buddha, since I've been shout out to Buddha, but I've been listening to MC Owens, and it's actually interesting listen to texts of Buddha, because some of his teachings are very similar to Jesus's, and I think it's just a sign of like people who, it's like enlightened people who want to steer other people toward the light,
towards the light. Yeah,
that's just an archetype, and that humans can embody that archetype, and I think that Jesus and Buddha are both probably part of that archetype.
Yeah, but as always, guys, if you have any thoughts, questions, disagreements, concerns about the idea of God, worship, love, let us know. You can hit us up on social media. We are at the Bottom Turtle Podcast on Instagram and Facebook, and the Bottom Turtle on Reddit is subreddit, and you can ask us questions, and Shannon's usually on there more than I am, so
yeah, I need to get a life
with him. But yeah, we want all that feedback, we want all that data. I'm sure by now we are not saying we've figured it out, but we're saying that this is what we think it is, and if you agree or disagree, just let us know, and we're open to talking about it.
Yeah, and listen to the other episodes and see whether or not there's some logical inconsistency. Because I think what you'll find when you go back and listen to, because I've actually listened to some old episodes, and it's actually surprising. Well, not surprising, but the number of things that we say in like
we
episode
talk about
2.
this all the time. This is all we talk about.
It's the reality. It's our reality. It's how it's
Yeah, like I don't know this is literally all we talk about. And so we're hoping that, you know, we can kind of build a community that's going to start to spread so we can all talk about these things this way.
Yeah.
And give a more, you know, fair and a nuanced understanding of the world we live in, our reality, and just get along a little more.
Yep, and hope people can communicate their gods more efficiently. So then you can say, "Oh yeah, I see the value in that god."
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Exactly. And
Yep.
so, but yeah, we'll be back for the 3rd season. It'll be a whole different ball game. We're predicting it's gonna step it up. So we appreciate you guys, and as always, guys, stay turtling, my friends.
All right,
See you guys later.
peace.